They ask you to count backwards from 10. You get to 7. Then you are awake in a different room, and 4 hours are gone, and none of that time ever existed for you. Not as boredom, not as darkness. Those hours didn't drag, and they didn't fly, because there was nobody in there to feel them. If you have ever been under a general anesthetic, you have already had a small sample of not existing. Anesthesia researchers describe why. With no sensory input arriving, the brain has nothing to stamp the passing of time onto, so no duration ever gets recorded. Now hold on to that feeling of nothing, because you are about to do something much harder with it. You have to stretch it across 14 billion years. Try to picture the year 1850. You can assemble the cobblestones, the horse-drawn carriages, the smell of coal smoke, but you cannot feel any of it because you weren't there. Now push further, 10,000 years before that. Still nothing. And here is the detail that should stop you. That nothingness doesn't bother you even slightly. No grief, no panic about the centuries you missed. Why would you panic? You weren't there to miss them. And what you missed is not a small thing. Before you existed, entire continents collided and tore apart. Dinosaurs lived and hunted and died across millions of generations. Empires rose, fought, and crumbled into dust that later became farmland. Every single person who ever lived before you experienced their whole life, every heartbreak, every ordinary Tuesday, inside the enormous stretch of time when you did not exist. You missed all of it completely, and missing it cost you exactly nothing. You didn't wait. You weren't sitting in a dark cosmic hallway restless watching a clock until your turn came. There was no you there to wait. That is the strange part. You have already been absent for almost the entire history of everything, and it has never once hurt. So when exactly did that stop? When did the absence end and you begin? This is where the science turns out to be stranger than the philosophy. Was it conception? At that point, there is a single cell, no brain, no nervous system, no machinery anywhere capable of having an experience. Nobody home, in the most literal sense. Was it the first heartbeat? A heart moves blood. It does not hold a memory or feel a fear. So researchers look instead for the earliest moment the physical equipment for experience could exist at all. And one proposed boundary is around 24 to 26 weeks of gestation, when connections between the thalamus and the cortex are first established. Before that, signals from the developing senses have no route into the machinery usually associated with conscious experience. A fetus moves in response to touch and sound well before this, but reflexes are not the same thing as experience. And here is what makes it genuinely uncomfortable. That boundary is disputed. It is a floor, not a doorway. Some researchers argue a functioning system doesn't really arrive until much later, even around a year after birth. Others place the shift at birth itself, when a nervous system that has known only warm, muffled darkness is hit all at once with light, cold, noise, hunger, and faces. The honest position is that science can describe the stages and cannot point to one universally agreed second where a body becomes a self. There is no clean frame where the screen is black and the very next frame contains you. And even the first flickers of experience were not the you listening right now, because that you needed something else, and it arrived late. Here is the evidence that makes this concrete. In a famous series of experiments, the psychologist Carolyn Rovi Collier tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile hanging above the crib. The babies quickly worked out that kicking made the mobile dance, and they loved it. Brought back days later, they remembered and started kicking immediately. 2-month-olds held that memory for a couple of days. 6-month-olds held it for weeks. So infant brains genuinely learn, store, and recall. The machinery is running. And yet almost none of it survives into your adult life. Your earliest years are not missing because nothing was recorded. They are missing because nothing that was recorded was built to last, and because there was not yet anyone for it to belong to. That owner shows up on a schedule you can actually watch. Put a spot of red makeup on a small child's nose and sit them in front of a mirror. For most of the first 2 years, they will treat the reflection as another baby and reach for the mirror. Then, somewhere around 18 to 24 months, something shifts. They reach for their own nose. That is the moment the mirror stops showing a stranger and starts showing a self. And it arrives roughly a year and a half after the body did. Language arrives around then too, and it hands you something a baby simply cannot have, a way to hold an event in a form you can repeat. This is my mother. This is what happened at the lake. This is who I am. Before you could narrate yourself, things were still happening to you. There just wasn't a narrator yet. So your beginning was never one arrival. It was a queue of them. A living organism appeared. Sensation appeared. Recognition appeared. Memory started to hold. A child learned to say the word I. And years after all of that, that child became someone capable of turning around and asking where the chain started. The border keeps sliding because the thing you're hunting for is not a hidden object sitting somewhere inside the skull. It is continuity. One moment inheriting a body, a set of memories, habits, and relationships from the moment before it. You did not step out of nothing fully assembled. You were handed over to yourself thousands of times until the handovers added up to somebody. Now, let's turn this around because there is a much darker version of the same question waiting on the other side. If you came from nothing and one day you will return to nothing, then the nothing at both ends should be the identical thing. So why does one of them leave you completely calm, while the other one can wake you at 3 in the morning with your heart going 2,000 gallops? 2,000 years ago, a Roman poet and philosopher named Lucretius noticed exactly this and made an argument so clean it can stop your breath. It's called the symmetry argument. The eternity before your birth and the eternity after your death are mirror images of each other. Both are simply your own non-existence. And you already know how the first one feels because you have inspected it 100 times without flinching. You look back at the abyss before you were born with total untroubled calm. So Lucretius says, look forward with the same calm. If the nothing behind you holds no terror, the nothing ahead cannot logically hold any either. Neither one has anybody inside it to suffer. Philosophers have been arguing with him for centuries, and the strongest objection is a serious one. The two voids, they say, are not actually symmetrical. Death takes something. It is the loss of a future you would otherwise have had. All the mornings and conversations and unfinished work removed from someone who exists and wants them. The time before your birth took nothing because there was nobody there to be robbed. One void is an absence. The other is a subtraction. You can test this yourself with a thought experiment, and it breaks in a way that is genuinely revealing. Imagine you could move your birth 10 years earlier without changing who you are. 10 more years of sunlight, meals, friendships, mistakes. Would the time before your actual birth suddenly count as something stolen from you? The moment you try to picture it, it collapses. Change which egg met which sperm. Change your parents' history. Change the world that shaped you, and you don't get an earlier version of you with a longer life. You get a different person entirely. There was no half-finished copy of you sitting in the dark before your birth, waiting to be given those extra years. But after your death, there is something real that gets cut off. Because by then, there is a life already in motion. Which is why the symmetry argument does not simply delete grief. The two voids may be identical from the inside and completely different when seen from the life standing between them. And this is where the whole question quietly turns. The fear was never about the void. The void has no texture, no duration, no loneliness, no dark. You proved that yourself, 4 hours at a time on an operating table. What you actually fear is the sentence left unfinished, the people who will still be in the room. A morning you won't see, precisely because you have lived long enough to learn what a morning is worth. Lucretius doesn't promise you a destination, he hands you a mirror, and the mirror lets you separate two things you normally feel as one: the blankness itself and the enormous love of being alive that makes the blankness look like a threat. There is one more thing hiding in all of this, and it might be the strangest of all. Step back from your own life and look at the whole picture. For nearly 14 billion years, the universe was a place with no one in it. Matter, radiation, gravity, expanding space. Stars formed, burned, and exploded, forging heavier elements that drifted out and later became rock and ocean and cells and nervous tissue. And then, on at least one small planet, one particular chain of that matter arranged itself into a shape that could open its eyes, look around, and ask where it came from. That shape is you. Not the point of the universe, not what it was aiming for. Just a temporary place where part of the cosmos can turn around and notice the rest of it. For a short window, the universe gets to experience itself, using your eyes to do it. So, where were you before you were born? Nowhere. There was no waiting you. Then, slowly, in a queue of arrivals nobody can pin to a single second, the universe folded a piece of itself into something that could sense, remember, love, ache, and ask impossible questions in the dark. One day, that continuity will stop. Lucretius only asks you to notice that the state on the far side contains no waiting, no loneliness, and no pain, exactly like the state you already walked out of. He cannot make loss unreal, and he cannot settle the philosophy for you. What he can do is show you where the terror actually lives. Not in the billions of silent years, in this brief, blazing moment that has finally learned how badly it wants to keep going. So the next time the thought of not existing puts a cold weight in your chest, go back to counting down from 10, and to the year 1850, and to the perfect calm you feel about every century that ran without you. You are not remembering a peaceful place. You are noticing the absence of anyone to be there. And then, notice what is different now. Now there is someone here, someone to care, to be afraid, to finish the sentence. The mystery was never how you survived the eternity before you, because you didn't survive it, you simply weren't in it. The mystery is how matter that had no point of view at all became you, and why, for this one short stretch, you get to look at any of it. Nothing is as ordinary as it looks.